There once was a man by the name of Afton, who donned a suit in which he was trapped in, made to suffer for the weight of his crimes, cursed to rot in eternal life. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we begin, let me ask you, what makes a good villain? Throughout history, villains have been an integral part to the stories we tell. While not every story needs a villain, they can be greatly improved with one. And today, I want to take a look at a villain that has intrigued me now for over a decade. William Afton from Five Nights at Freddy's is such an interesting character to talk about, because unlike most other villains, we only find out about him in the past tense. In a majority of the series, we don't see him physically. In fact, we only technically see him in the flesh in 2 out of the over 10 entries. Yet I find his story and characterization to be so fascinating. The way he's portrayed in the games, the books, and now in the movie are all so different, yet his overall characterization stays mostly the same. There are massive differences between each incarnation, but somehow they all still feel like the same character. So, I figured, as a late celebration of a decade of Five Nights at Freddy's, I would take a shot at analyzing the overarching villain of the franchise. We aren't just going to cover him from the movie, but from the books, and of course his many appearances in the games. This is going to be my longest character analysis video yet, so please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and comment below what FNAF character you would want to see me cover in the future. I doubt they would take as long as Afton to cover, but I am willing to go in depth if there is enough request. With that out of the way, let's dive into William Afton and see what exactly makes him an interesting villain. So, here's the thing. Unlike my past analysis videos where I would start from the first piece of media the character appeared in chronologically and go from there, this video has to be a bit different. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's is famously confusing, with games out of order and many key plot points still unproven to this day. And while I would have it no other way, since I love how we as a community piece together the lore year by year, it does make it hard to analyze a character's events that aid their characterization when the timeline is completely out of order and mostly held up by fan speculation. So, for this video, I'm going to be jumping around a bit throughout the game's story, and I promise I'll try my best to explain where we are so you aren't confused. A lot of this is also going to be based on my personal theories and interpretations while playing the games, so if it doesn't match up with yours, that's completely okay. I'd love to hear about your interpretation in the comments. We alright? Good. Let's move right along then. To start, let's talk about how the world was first introduced to Afton in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. While he is indirectly mentioned in the first game through a missable Easter egg, it makes more sense to start here since this is the first time we technically see him on screen. The story surrounding the game is this. You, the player, are a brand new night shift security guard in 1987 at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a pizzeria with its draw being animatronic characters that could sing and perform while families eat and play arcade games. However, at night during the gameplay, these same animatronics will come attack you in your office, with their only defense being a Freddy Fazbear head that you can wear to fool their facial recognition software. You also find out that the older, much more withered versions of the characters from the old location are present and being used for parts, and in later nights they'll also come to attack you. That's basically all we need to know for the main gameplay story, but where it gets really interesting is in its secrets. When you die, you have an extremely rare chance to encounter one of 4 different minigames. Save them, give cake to the children, Foxy Go Go Go, and give gifts, give life. In the Foxy Go 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 minigame, you play as Foxy and run out of Pirate's Cove to greet the children. On your 3rd try, you find a mysterious purple man smiling in the corner. You run out to see the children are all dead, and get jump scared. In Give Cake to the Children, you play as Freddy, giving cake to the children and keeping their anger down while one is locked outside. The purple man once again comes on screen. After the child's eyes grow wide, the sprite turns into a ghost, and you get jump scared. In the Save Them minigame, you play as the withered version of Freddy, walking through the pizzeria to save someone? It's unclear who. As you traverse through the map, you can find the ghosts of more children in different quarters of the pizzeria. You're eventually stopped by that same purple man who simply says, "You can't," and the minigame ends. And in the final minigame, Give Gifts, Give Life, you play as the puppet. In this sequence, you first give a gift to each of the 4 past children, then place a mask of the different animatronic characters on their face. And again, you're jump scared, but not before you briefly see a 5th child in the middle of the room. It's simple to see what these minigames are trying to tell us. The reason the old location had to be closed down in-universe is because a set of homicides occurred, resulting in the deaths of at least 5 children. And the puppet was able to somehow bring those children back to life by binding their souls to the 5 animatronics from the first game, who are the withered models in this game. That's why these animatronics are attacking you, because you most likely are dressed in the same outfit this purple man was wearing, indicated by the badge on his chest. He was most likely another worker at Freddy's. But it was this purple man that caught everyone's eye. Who is he exactly? Why did he do this to the children? Did he work at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza? What's his name? Could he be the phone guy who's been helping us? Are we playing as this purple-clad character? The mystery of the purple guy took over the early days of FNAF theories. Everyone wanted to figure out who this guy was and why he did what he did. It wasn't until much later did we actually get a bit of lore to figure out exactly who this guy is, and to get there, we're going to have to jump a bit forward and skip the 3rd game for now. I promise this will make sense later in the video. Because in order to get a proper introduction to who this guy is, we need to take a look at the novel Five Nights at Freddy's: The Silver Eyes. We'll be using some panels from the graphic novel adaptation so you don't have to look at a bunch of text for this section. Unlike other forms of connected media nowadays, like Star Wars for example, the books aren't actually meant to connect to the game seamlessly. Instead, they're meant to be more like companion pieces, almost like an alternate version of the story. Characters and events can exist across both, but the overall plots are very different. Because of that, I'm going to brush past most of the main plot of the book in order to focus on what's coherent to the video. The key plot points you need to know is that the main group of characters were all connected to the murders at Freddy's by knowing one of the victims. After a memorial reunion service, they reconnect and decide to explore the now abandoned remains of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. In a good chunk of the book, this group is accompanied by the night guard of the now abandoned Freddy's location, Dave Miller. He's not exactly the nicest guy, but he does show the main group around the ruins of Freddy's. Near the end of the book, we get the massive reveal that he was the man that committed those murders all those years ago, and that this whole time he's been using a fake identity. His real name is William Afton. This right here was our first real introduction to who the killer at Freddy's was, and the first time we were given a name to put to these murders, William Afton. Though the graphic novel adaptation came out years after the book, so we only had descriptions to go off of concerning how he looked at the time. And because this is a full book, we actually have a character to analyze. So how does he act? Well, Afton is cruel, vile, and a massive coward. He locked one of the main characters in a dangerous springlock suit, then continued to show off his own springlock scars while laughing maniacally at his victim's fear and pain, displaying his cruelness. He lures people to Freddy so the animatronics will do his work for him, and in turn, any witnesses that get close to the truth of his crimes get the same treatment, displaying how vile he is. And the reason why he stayed close to the group is so that he could kill each of them one by one so they would never find out about his crimes, which are the same as the games, all due to his fear of being caught and imprisoned, displaying his cowardice. Putting this all together, our first real introduction to William Afton is that he's just a generic serial killer type character. Yes, these are all interesting traits for a villain to have, but I wouldn't call him unique based on these alone. Though at the very least, it does give us a name to use for our main villain of the story. Something else important we do learn is that alongside a man named Henry Emily, who's the father of the book's main character Charlie, William Afton was a co-founder of Fredbear's Family Diner, which was mentioned in FNAF 2 as being the original location before Freddy's.
Yeah, we're gonna try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down.
Afton managed bills and finances and every so often wore the suit of the Spring Bonnie Springlock animatronic, while Henry was the mechanic and inventor of the actual animatronic characters, and also every so often donned the Fredbear Springlock suit. This is a major part of his connection to the Freddy's brand and will be important for understanding his story. While this was revealed in the books, the game cemented his involvement with Fredbears in later entries, along with his name being the same in the games as it is here in the books. This is a common thing in the later years of the franchise. The books, while not being directly canon to the games, do influence events in a parallel way. The Silver Eyes, despite not being directly canon to the story of Five Nights at Freddy's, is how we found out Afton's name, it's how we first meet Henry Emily, and it's how we find out he has a daughter. more on that later. But truthfully, there isn't any real underlying depth to Book Afton's character. William is kinda generic in his first proper appearance. Looking back, I see him as an early test run of a main villain. The ideas of him being cruel, vile, and cowardly are there, they're just very surface level. In The Silver Eyes, he's kinda just a crazy guy that killed a bunch of kids and is afraid of being caught, so he silences anyone who gets close to the truth. Nothing more and nothing less. It's kinda underwhelming in a lot of ways, but for the story that's being told, I think it works pretty well. While this is how the first novel chose to present William Afton, the games decided to take a different approach. But to understand that, we have to jump to Five Nights at Freddy's 4, specifically the minigames. Literally none of the actual night gameplay pertains to Afton himself, so we're skipping that. FNAF 4's minigames are set up slightly differently than the minigames in FNAF 2. Instead of dying and having a small chance to get a minigame, every night we start a pre-night minigame instead. These are relatively long, so I'll summarize them. In these minigames, we play as a young, unnamed boy throughout 6 different days. In each of the minigames, we walk around either our house or familiar animatronic pizzeria while being tormented by our older brother, who wears a Foxy mask. A lot of these minigames end with the child either crying from being frightened and alone or being scared by his brother. Something extremely notable is that these minigames are all set in 1983, and at the time, Freddy's predecessor was around, Fredbear's Family Diner, the same place Afton founded alongside Henry Emily. We also get confirmation that the book and the game line up Afton's backstory through this Easter egg, where we see the purple guy suiting up an employee. At Fredbear's, this child was extremely scared of the animatronics, which is why his jerky older brother enjoys scaring him with a Foxy mask. But on the flip side, whenever he is alone, the child talks to a plush of Fredbear. In fact, that same plush seems to be everywhere, with its eyes following the child no matter where you are on screen. Keep this in mind. The minigames eventually culminate to the child's birthday, and his brother, being a massive jerk, decides to push him close to the animatronics. But taking things too far, he shoves his brother's head into the Fredbear animatronic's jaw, and... Now, why is this important? How exactly does this depressing story of an innocent boy pertain to Afton? Well, it's because of the final cutscene. In the final cutscene, when you beat the entirety of the game, the plush has one final conversation with the boy. This is what it says. This, in my opinion, is the most heartbreaking scene from the entire series, for good reason. We basically just watched a child's last moments before passing away. Even though it's not explicit, and this is all fictional, this is incredibly heavy stuff for a game series about funny jump scare bears. But you know what makes this even more tragic? That Fredbear plush is Afton. The unnamed child is his son. While it's not heavily hinted at in this game, further games basically confirm that this entire time, Afton has been watching his son from afar by using a camera and walkie-talkie inside of the Fredbear plush. That explains why its eyes are always following him around and the plush appears to be everywhere. But most of that time, it's not exactly Afton doing the talking. He's playing a character, he's acting like Fredbear, or at least how he presumes Fredbear acts. Why? Well, that's up to interpretation. Maybe it was to slowly ease his son's fear of Fredbear and the other animatronics, but in this final cutscene, who he is truly comes out. This is Afton's first true lines in the series, predating the Silver Eyes, because now he isn't speaking through a character. In all the minigames, he's been talking through the Fredbear plush as Fredbear, but as he continues to speak in this final cutscene, his mask slips off. He transitions from acting like the character, saying things like, "We're still your friends," as if the Fredbear plush and the rest of the plushies are alive, into saying, "I'm still here, I will put you back together," where you can tell he's no longer acting like the character and instead trying to be there for his son in his final moments. Afton isn't a monster in this scene. He's not a one-dimensional killer. He's a grieving father, a father whose own creation ended up hurting and eventually ending his son. Afton was the co-founder of Fredbear's. This happened in his establishment, and in a cruel sense of irony, all he could do in his son's final moments is talk through the same character that did this to him. That's just devastating. While we didn't know it at the time, this was where the Afton from the books and the Afton from the games truly diverged. Afton in the books, while having many similarities in terms of backstory to the one in the games, never really gets any underlying depth despite being a cruel, evil man. His characterization varies massively from the Silver Eyes to the next two books, the Twisted Ones and the Fourth Closet, but in the entire book trilogy, he's still that same sadistic monster. He doesn't care about his family in any way and doesn't seem to have any form of human empathy. But this right here is the key difference. The final scene perfectly displays how damaged the game version of Afton was before anything was set into motion. If this was all we knew about Afton, we wouldn't agree with what he did, but we would have understood why he would have gone crazy. He lost his son. No father should ever have to go through that. He's still a villain for what he will eventually do, but he gets just slightly more sympathetic because we know what he's been through. But don't get confused, this is not a defense for his crimes. He still will do many evil things in the future that are not justified by this event, and there are many more than we've already covered. Because while we didn't know it at the time, we were witnessing the death of a father and the birth of a monster. After his son's death, Afton did try to go through with his promise, "I will put you back together." He needed to find out how to bring someone back to life, and there was something that might have proven it was possible. To properly explain this, I need to briefly touch on a set of minigames that are in a future game we'll cover, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. We're going to cover the gameplay as it pertains to Afton later in the video, but for now, we have to look at the event that followed the passing of Afton's son. This is where that little detail we know from the books about Henry Emily having a daughter is going to come into play. In Pizza Sim, you can unlock a set of minigames simply titled Security Puppet. In these minigames, you play as the puppet in an older Freddy or Fredbear's location. Your goal is simple, stop the child from exiting that's wearing a green band. But in most of the minigames, there is no child with a green band, until you get to the last level. In this final level, you can find a child with a green band locked outside of the restaurant, a little girl. As she slowly disappears into shadow, you can freely move as the security puppet and head to the door. You go outside to try and find her, but it's too late. You find her body as a purple car pulls away. The same purple car from the Give Cake to the Children minigame in FNAF 2. What you're seeing here is another perspective of that minigame, this time from the puppet's point of view. In the rain, the puppet short circuits and collapses next to the child, and her soul is fused to the puppet, becoming the first ever spirit to possess an animatronic. That's how the puppet was able to bond the souls to the future animatronics and give gifts, give life. She was the first. She understood how it works. But that doesn't explain why Afton would go out of his way to do this. In the original minigame, it's presented as what's basically a planned drive-by. He pulls up, gets out of his car, takes out the girl, then drives off. There was some intent here. Why did he seemingly target this random girl? Well, thanks to other secrets in the game, we find out why. This little girl was Henry's daughter, Charlie. Afton killed his own business partner's daughter. Why? Because Henry was the inventor behind the Fredbear characters, not Afton. Thanks to the book, we know that he was just the man doing the paperwork. Henry was the inventor. It also probably didn't help that, as we know from the Silver Eyes, Henry did wear the Fredbear suit semi-frequently, so most likely, even though it was due to his neglect, he placed his rage and blame onto the shoulders of Henry. Afton wanted revenge for what Henry's creation took from him, so in a blind rage, he took Henry's most important creation from him, his daughter. Now, I want to hammer this home. Afton was never a good person. He was never a true tragic figure. He was a terrible person from the start. It's implied from his very first appearance that he was always a bad man. Just look at his smile on his sprites. He's enjoying what he's doing. Even before this all happened, the FNAF 4 minigames still confirm that he is a neglectful father. He's so wrapped up in his work that he doesn't even have time to take care of his children or spend time with them. He just uses a plushie with a walkie-talkie to try and keep an eye on them in his house. He doesn't teach them, he doesn't correct them. His older son became such a jerk that he made a mistake he could never take back, and that rests on the father's shoulders for not teaching him better. Afton reacted so poorly to his mistakes as a father and lashed out in rage at someone who was a complete bystander, an innocent person caught in the crossfire. What happened with his son was a set of mistakes and oversights, but what he did to Charlie was intentional. He did this himself with his own hands. It didn't take one simple mistake or one bad day. It was the result of Afton making the wrong choice over and over again. I think a lot of people tend to forget that you can still have a sympathetic villain, but also still make them a villain that you dislike and want to see go down. Not every villain has to have an understandable goal that you may agree with to an extent. Sometimes they can just have bad things happen to them and make the audience feel sorry, but also have actions afterwards that far outweigh what happened to them personally. And now that we have this cleared up, it's time to talk about one of the most important factors to the future of Afton's character: his motives in the years that followed. There was something major that was introduced in the books around this time, something that would affect how we view the series: the concept of Remnant. This weird soul energy is essentially the MacGuffin for the entire series. Most of what we know about it, again, comes from the FNAF novels. Here we find out that Remnant is the remnant of a soul after someone has died. How it works exactly is up in the air, but we do know it pertains to someone's memories and relationship to an inanimate object. Using this remnant allows a person to bind the soul and memories of the recently deceased to said inanimate object. In our case, that being the animatronics of the series. This is what William experiments with to bring his son back, and to tie it in, this is why he killed those children in the FNAF 2 minigames. In Foxy Go Go Go, as well as Save Them, we can see the after effects of Afton's crimes. These children died so he could experiment with and collect more Remnant, most likely to try and bring back his own son. And after he learned about Remnant, he took the lives of more innocent people to fuel his own obsession with bringing his son back. In that way, he's almost like a modern portrayal of Dr. Frankenstein, trying to play God and bring his son back from the dead. But the next game that we get in this series would only fill in more of Afton's story, jumping a bit forward, or maybe backward, in the timeline with a bang. Five Nights at Freddy's sister location, in terms of story, is my favorite of all the games, and is also another crucial piece of Afton's history we need to analyze. Once again, Afton doesn't really appear physically in this game, similar to FNAF 2 and FNAF 4, but he is still very much involved in the plot. After the Charlie incident, Afton needed to experiment with Remnant to try and replicate what happened with Charlie for his own son. But it's not like he had a ton of people that were close to a bunch of inanimate objects that recently passed. Afton needed more test subjects, he needed more Remnant, so he created a set of animatronics that were specifically designed to lure and capture unsuspecting children. These consisted of the fun-time versions of Freddy and Foxy, as well as two completely new animatronics, Ballora, a ballerina, and Circus Baby, a clown, all built under his brand new business, Afton Robotics. These animatronics were meant to be rented for children's parties instead of being housed in their own pizzeria, but underneath their fun pastel designs is some truly sinister hidden features. While Ballora and Funtime Foxy were built with music boxes to sing and dance, they were also made to lure children away from their parents. After that, Funtime Freddy and Circus Baby were meant to capture them by using giant claws built into their stomach hatches. Obviously, this is a completely horrifying idea. It really illustrates how far Afton would go for his goals, but even more so how twisted he's becoming. This method of capturing children is perfectly in tune with the original traits we saw in Book Afton. Cruelness and how he would take these children from their families, vileness and how unabashedly evil this plan is, and cowardice as he tries to use these machines to do his dirty work for him without lifting a finger. But the most Afton-heavy thing in this game is in the intro cutscene, where we, for the first time ever, get to hear Afton's voice as someone starts asking him about those same features that I just described to you. I'm going to play the entirety of the game intro cutscene here so you can get the full feel, so here it is.
There's no doubting what you've achieved on a technical level. These are clearly state-of-the-art. There are just certain design choices that were made for these robots that we don't fully understand. We were hoping that you could shed some light on those.
She can dance. She can sing. She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
Talk about a game intro. Now that we have some Afton voice lines, we can pick them apart to figure out his characterization in more detail. First, let's start with what's actually happening here. The other man is obviously asking Afton why the animatronics were built like this, with luring music boxes and claws coming out of their stomachs. There's no practical reason as to why they should have these things. But Afton sidesteps the question while acting like he was answering. He doesn't talk about all of the animatronics, just one. She can dance, she can sing. He's only talking about Circus Baby. Why? Well, Baby is the leading lady, the one with the most features. It might be more difficult to explain the others, but Baby has loads of other features. He doesn't have to mention the stomach hatch claw when you can focus on all these other amazing things she can do. Obviously, this isn't what the other man was asking, and Afton knows this. He knows exactly what he's asking, yet he smartly aims the question at the positives of what his animatronics can do, rather than the more disturbing design choices. But on top of that, it almost feels like he's bragging. Built-in helium tech can take song requests, and she can even dispense ice cream. Of course, for an animatronic built for children's entertainment, this is pretty impressive. I sure know if I was around like 8, I would love an animatronic at my birthday party that could do all the things that Circus Baby can do. But again, this isn't what the other man was asking about. Afton is acting like a proud parent, boasting about his child's accomplishments even though nobody asked, which is all the more disturbing when you get reminded what these animatronics were built for. I assume if this conversation went on, Afton would only continue to answer like he has here, sidestepping the questions in order to build up the more innocent design choices. But I think what's most interesting about this scene is how normal he sounds. Afton doesn't sound unhinged or in the least bit unnerving. Unlike his portrayal in the books, this Afton sounds very well put together. He speaks with a low, smooth tone with very little inflections in his voice. He has a slight British accent that isn't too over the top. It's just enough to where he could sound more mysterious and eloquent. He comes off like a suave businessman rather than an unstable psychopath. I would actually say this Afton is rather charming. Of course, we know what he's done, and fans know what he will do, so hearing him act so nonchalant, so natural, so human, as he talks about his machines made to steal children, it's almost just as chilling as it would be if he was acting utterly insane. The last story-relevant thing for Afton in this game is what happens to his daughter. A little after completion of the game and the non-canon custom night, the fandom slowly pieced together that Afton's family consisted of himself, a supposed unnamed wife, an older son, a middle daughter, and a younger son. We know what happened to the younger son, but in this game we're introduced to Afton's daughter, Elizabeth Afton. Between nights, we get to hear her voice as she speaks to William and how she's infatuated with Circus Baby, which makes sense, since Afton apparently told her that she was made just for her.
Daddy just once let me go play with her. She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?
However, the last piece of dialogue we get from her is when she's alone in a room with Baby.
Don't tell Daddy that I'm here. I wanted to watch a show too. I don't know why he won't let me come see you. You're wonderful. Where did the other children go?
Similar to FNAF 2, every so often when you die, you can encounter a rare minigame, though this time it's always the same one, where you play as Baby giving cupcakes to children. On its own, it's a pretty cute platformer, definitely an improvement compared to the crude Atari-styled minigames of FNAF 2, but at the end, if you ignore the exit, you can actually find a vanilla ice cream cone. Taking this ice cream back to the beginning of the level will unlock a secret cutscene. Here it is. So, yeah, In a twist of irony, Afton's child snatchers ended up accidentally snatching his child. This is now the second time his creations ended up hurting his children, but this time, it was directly his fault. Fredbear was technically Henry's creation, but this was all Afton. He built them with these design choices for sinister intentions. He can't blame anyone else for this, it all rests with him. I can only imagine how this broke him, how this tore him up inside, and how he probably tried to look for someone else to take the blame, but he just had to accept that it was his fault. Once again, his neglect cost him something he could never get back. After the death of Elizabeth, in-universe, the Funtime animatronics were hid in an underground facility. This is where the main gameplay comes in. Eventually, during these main nights, we get to watch over these animatronics and perform maintenance. But during main gameplay, Baby doesn't act like the rest of the animatronics. We never see her physically, it's only ever her voice. The way she speaks also feels more personal, less robotic, more human.
I don't recognize you. You are new. I remember this scenario, however. It's a strange thing to want to do, to come here. I'm curious what events would lead a person to want to spend their nights in a place like this, willingly.
There is one key detail that tipped people off to what changed within Baby. In the minigame, Circus Baby has blue eyes, but in the main game, she has green eyes. You know who else has green eyes? Elizabeth. The soul of Elizabeth was now bound to Circus Baby. Afton got exactly what he wanted, a soul that was bound to an animatronic through Remnant. It only cost his daughter to get it. Obviously, this wasn't the outcome he wanted. Once again, his creations resulted in another one of his children's demise. But I can safely say that this time, it was in a way, karma. Unlike his younger son, where you could argue this was a series of parental mistakes, if the timeline is correct, then Afton has committed at least one terrible crime, something he could legitimately never make up for. Elizabeth didn't deserve this, of course. She was just an innocent child, but I do think Afton did deserve some kind of penance for what he did. This should have been his wake-up call to stop what he was doing, turn himself in, make a different choice, and simply let go. He needed to let go of his obsession with trying to bring his son back, to let go of his hate, to own up to his guilt and to his crimes, but he didn't. He kept going down this same path, causing more pain, more suffering because of his actions. He continued to experiment with Remnant and commit heinous acts. He just kept going. Once he figured out how to properly get Remnant, all it took were the events of Foxy Go 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 and save them for him to experiment with all the Remnant he needed. By using his old spring Bonnie suit from Fredbear's, he was able to lure 5 children away from the main stage and...
Hello? What on earth are you doing there? Didn't you get the memo? The place is closed down, at least for a while. Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right.
Collecting the Remnant he needed. It's at this point that Afton is probably at his metaphorical highest in his sense, and the absolute lowest in our sense. He's dodged cops and has been experimenting with Remnant for years, leaving a wake of pain throughout. Seemingly nothing can truly stop him. That is until you take into account the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 3. We're finally going back to cover this one. It should be noted that originally, FNAF 3 was meant to be the ending of a Five Nights at Freddy's game trilogy. It was supposed to be, in a way, the grand finale of the story. But of course, we all know that the series continued due to fan request and the sheer success, resulting in the multimedia franchise we know today. Set in the year 2017, or 2023, we aren't quite sure, a new attraction has opened up, Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction meant to play on the ghost stories surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza from the 1980s. You play as an actor playing a security guard, watching the place and making sure nothing catches on fire. That is until something decides to join you for your nights. Since we've now covered all the background details regarding Afton's character, we can finally talk about this game, because the entirety of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is his game. It's probably the most William Afton-centered game in the series. And the entirety of the story is meant to symbolize the culmination of his karma for everything he has done up until this point. This game is where we really see him pay for his sins, and boy does he pay. Let's start with the phone calls. Now, for the past 2 games, you had a companion that spoke to you during the nights in the form of Phone Guy. He was essentially your tutorial, giving in-universe tips to the player on how to play the game while sprinkling in details about the lore. Back in FNAF 1, he died during his 4th call, and since FNAF 2 is a prequel, it makes sense that he would return in the same guiding role. The 3rd game takes place way after his death, but it does bring back Phone Guy in the form of pre-recorded tutorial tapes. The tapes were a guide on how to use the Springlock suits that were originally used at the first Fredbear's Family Diner location. These were meant to double as both an actual animatronic, wires and all, as well as a wearable suit that human entertainers could perform in. This is also the same type of suit that Afton and Henry wore back in the late 80s, and it's the suit that Afton used to lure the children into the back room to do what he did.
These tapes will provide you with much needed information on how to handle / climb into / climb out of mascot costumes. Right now we have 2 specially designed suits that double as both animatronic and suit. So please pay close attention while learning how to operate these suits, as accidents / injuries / death / irreparable and grotesque maiming can occur.
Throughout the nights, these tapes play, and we learn that these suits were very, very fragile. Just the smallest thing, such as getting the spring locks wet from sweat or a sudden movement, can set them off, causing a spring lock failure. This is where the metal parts of the animatronic fall back into place, crushing anything or anyone that might be inside.
Try not to nudge or press against any of the spring locks inside the suit. Do not touch the spring locks at any time. Do not breathe on the spring locks, as moisture may loosen them and cause them to break loose. In the case that the spring locks come loose while you are wearing a suit, please try to maneuver away from populated areas before bleeding out, as to not ruin the customer experience.
While these tapes are slightly morbid, they kinda seem inconsequential when you're first playing the game, but they make more sense when you pair them with the minigames. Just like FNAF 4, FNAF 3 also features minigames between nights, though these ones are very simplistic in comparison. In each minigame, you play as a different animatronic from FNAF 1 as they walk around the pizzeria. You follow a shadowy purple version of Freddy until you reach a door you can't get into, and when you try to walk away, the purple guy himself attacks and dismantles your animatronic. Now truthfully, there's no solid reasoning for why Afton is doing this. The working theories people have are that Afton could be trying to rip these animatronics apart to get more remnant, or he's trying to cover his tracks from his homicides years ago. When we do finally get to the 5th and final minigame, we see that we are no longer playing as an animatronic, since they've all been dismantled, but instead the ghost of one of the children. This is implied to be the ghost inside of Golden Freddy, which of course is an empty suit and not a full animatronic, so there was no remnant to be collected. As a ghost, we can finally go into the back room, only to find Afton cornered by other ghost children, his back literally against the wall. You follow him around the room until he runs into that same Springlock suit that he wore at Fredbear's, the same suit that he used to lure the children away. He laughs, figuring that this would keep him safe, keep him powerful, until... Afton's crimes have finally caught up to him. This is the culmination of Afton's sins, being spring-locked into the same colorful suit that he committed all his crimes in. It's so interesting to me that Afton laughs right before it happens, like he presumed he already won by wearing the suit. To him, it was a sense of security, a sense of power. I can imagine at this point in his life, he considered himself untouchable to a point where nobody could truly stop him. Boy, was he wrong. The best part is, this wasn't a result of the ghost children. All they did was scare him. Similar to how it was his actions that eventually led to the deaths of his children, it was his actions that eventually led to his own death. Afton literally sprung his own trap. He was the maker of his own demise. For years, he was able to get away with all of these crimes, but he got his just desserts in the end. Talk about karma. Honestly, even without all the added context we talked about that would get added later on, this was still very satisfying to see at the time. I remember being so shocked because this connected so beautifully with what was going on in the tutorial tapes and the main gameplay. Actually, I believe it's time we finally talk about the meat of the game, because unlike all the others, Afton is much more of an active antagonist during your nights. FNAF 3's gameplay is very different compared to any other game in the series, even to this day. You went from defending against 4 animatronics to 11, and now 1. Seems too good to be true, right? Well, the game does lure you into a false sense of security. During the first night, you actually can't find any real threats. There's no animatronics on the map. The entire first night is an easy breeze to help you get familiarized with the setup, but when you start the second night, you're told that they found one, a real one. Going around the cameras, eventually you'll see him. Look familiar? This is Afton, 30 years after his Springlock incident, his soul bound to the animatronic suit hybrid that he caused so much torment in. In FNAF 3, the entire game is basically a prolonged fight between you and the monster of the series. He's no longer the suave, smooth-talking businessman from before. He no longer even resembles a human. He's just this green, rotten husk with piercing, glowing white eyes. The name that's been given to this form of him, in my opinion, is perfect. Springtrap, calling back to the same incident that put him in this predicament. His design is also possibly the best of the entire series to this day. It balances meat and machine so he doesn't look weak and brittle. You could see underneath the dirty gold casing bits of metal endoskeleton parts mixed with actual human remains, but it never shows too much to where you're utterly repulsed by it. His human eyes are fused to the animatronic ones, so the glow highlights the veins and depth. It's a design echoing the torment that Afton must be experiencing every time he takes a step. Design-wise, he's perfect, and his gameplay complements his design so well. Springtrap is unlike any other threat that you have or will face in the series. Unlike the mindless animatronics that follow set paths you can memorize, his actions are unpredictable. He hides in the cameras so you might miss him. He makes very subtle sounds so you can't hear him. He hides in the vents to try and flank you. And on top of that, the only way to defend yourself from him is to lure him away with a sound in another room. If you lose track of him and he's standing right in front of you, unless you can pull out a Hail Mary, you've basically already lost. While keeping track of him, you're also battling with a faulty building that causes your audio cue, cameras, and ventilation to go offline randomly, and battling against the phantom animatronic hallucinations. They won't kill you, but if you get jump scared, they will make you run to the maintenance panel to try and fix your tools before Springtrap can get to you. This is by far one of the most stressful games in the series. All it takes is one badly timed error, and unless you can save yourself in time, the night might already be lost. The monster is seemingly all-powerful, and your tools are unreliable. All you can do is think fast and react as best you can. The entirety of FNAF 3's gameplay is like fighting a massive boss battle. Springtrap is the ultimate threat you can face, and despite the simple premise, I personally find this one of the hardest games in the series. That's mostly due to my personal preference to reaction-based FNAF games versus planning ahead and hoping things work, but I know some people do actually like this gameplay better than the others. Comment below which FNAF game you enjoy playing most. I'm curious to see what the consensus is. This game is legitimately incredible in terms of story and gameplay, but it's also incredible in how this is, in a way, a climax to Afton's story. You could also say that him actually getting springtrapped in the minigame is his character's climax, but having an entire game devoted to making him both a massive real-time threat and showing how he's eternally suffering due to his sins is even more satisfying. I love how cathartic it is too. He didn't just die in the suit that he carried out these crimes in, he also had his soul bound to the suit through Remnant because of the memories he has of it. He is now experiencing what he did to all of his victims, but I imagine this is so much worse. Unlike his victims, his body is pierced and broken by a suit, held in place like a meat kebab. It's almost like a prison, a tomb that he has no chance of escaping from. But even despite that, this game doesn't make him a wobbling, weak corpse. He's still a massive threat and incredibly scary against the unreliable tools the player has. It's a perfect way to bring us face to face with the monster and actually fight him one-on-one. And to wrap this game up in a neat little bow, after completing all of the needed minigames and tasks, on the final night the player ignites a fire to burn the attraction down. The fire seemingly marked the ending of the franchise, for a few months anyway, but if you brighten the final newspaper image, you can find Springtrap in the darkness, waiting to rise again. Not much to analyze here other than I always come back. Springtrap also has a cameo at the end of Sister Location teasing that he survived the fire, but we already knew this, so again, not much to analyze. I'm still so surprised how much personality they stuck into Afton in this game despite him not getting a single line. The minigames give us a bit of information on how Afton acts right before his demise with how unhinged he is, but I also want to bring up something many people skip out on: the strategy he applies to get into your office. Afton may be in constant pain, but he has no doubt kept his intellect. From how he spoke years earlier, as well as most of his feats, we could tell that Afton was pretty smart in his life. I mean, he did do all of those experiments with Remnant and planned out how to get away with all of his crimes. This is heavily showcased here in the main gameplay. In all of the cameras, Springtrap deliberately hides from the player or obscures himself as much as he can. Sometimes the only way you can really find him is by looking for his glowing white eyes. It's almost like he's hunting you as a predator, like you're his prey, his next victim. He might be fooled by pre-recorded voices, causing him to be lured into other rooms, but once he actually finds you in your office, there's literally nothing that you can do to stop him from taking you out. He's not fooled by a foam mask, there's no door to close. He will find you, and after that, there is no escape. In terms of a climax for Afton, I consider FNAF 3 a masterpiece, and I definitely think it's aged well compared to the other entries like FNAF 2. There is still 2 more games to go through to see his falling action, but there's one more detour for us to go on. Let's talk about the movie. The Five Nights at Freddy's movie that released in 2023 is something I find to be repeatedly fascinated by. While it does attempt to adapt the mythos of the universe, it doesn't feel held back by the first game, since they pull ideas and references from many points of the series. But the main point of the film is to retell the story of the first game and parts of the third game in a more streamlined fashion while focusing more on the human characters. Because of that, I'd argue the writing for the humans is better here than it ever has been. Mike, Abby, Vanessa, even the side characters are all super likable. But you're here for Afton, and boy, do they have a really interesting interpretation of him. Afton has 3 key scenes in the movie. The first is talking to Mike as a career counselor, the second is Mike's call so he could accept his new job, and the third is the climax and ending of the film. We're going to look at all 3 to see how he's characterized in this film versus his other counterparts. In his first scene, Afton is disguised as Steve Raglan, a career counselor. His apparent goal is to help Mike find a job after his whole assault a dad fiasco. Interestingly, if you rearrange the letters of Steve Raglan, it spells out Everlasting, which is 1 letter off from Everlasting, which is in itself a reference to his famous line, "I always come back." Already a key tip-off to the audience that unscrambled his name. It's interesting how similar on a surface level Afton is in this movie to his book counterpart. Both fake their names to hide their identities and basically set the plot in motion by acting as a false friend to the heroes. And this won't be the last time these 2 versions of the character showcase similarities. Similar to the Afton we know in the games, he talks in a very low tone, without many inflections in his voice. He moves slowly with a relaxed body language. He might be a bit condescending at times, but he acts like a relatively chill guy.
What is your deal, Mike? You sit before me, asking for help.
That is until he reads that Mike's full name is Michael Schmidt. Now, theories aside from Mike's father being Henry in this universe, I want you to look at how Afton's body language changes.
Coffee? Would you like some coffee? I made some coffee. I'm gonna be brutally honest with you here, Mike. Given your track record, your options are gonna be extremely limited.
Look at how all of a sudden his eyes widen and he chokes on his words. He starts acting much more nervous. His low tone starts peaking a bit. He needs to get up for coffee and you can see him collect himself while he's at the coffee machine. When Mike gets up to leave, he quickens his words, saying,
I have a job for you. Come on, sit down. Sit.
He tries to act relaxed like he was before, but it's very obvious that his chill tone is completely gone and replaced with a much more jittery one.
I can't do nights.
That's such a shame.
When Mike has to decline the job, Afton just puts on a fake smile and says, that's such a shame. Like he knows he has to play it cool, but he just wants to leap across the desk and strangle him. Afton in this scene goes from relatively calm to something we've only seen Afton act once before. Desperate. He desperately wants Mike to take this job, because spoilers, Afton is the one that killed Mike's brother in this film. Even putting the potential theory aside that Mike's father might be Afton's old business partner, in the context of this film, Afton desperately wants Mike to take this gig due to his connection with him. He wants him at Freddy's as a night guard so he could do to him what he did to his brother. It's a bit ironic that on your first viewing, Afton could be viewed as having all the cards while Mike is desperate for a job. But when you analyze it, Afton is the desperate one, because if Mike declines, his one chance at tying up loose ends walks away. This is complemented by the next scene we see with him, when Mike gives him a call. You can tell from his first line he's still very apprehensive, but the moment Mike asks if the job is still available, you can almost hear the excitement in his voice when he says,
"Oh, it absolutely is."
Again, similar to before, you could see him take in a completely different demeanor. His voice peaks, his laugh seems a bit unnerving, and as he talks about the old pizzeria, it has a chilling tone to it. Afton has been getting away with his crimes for years now. Not only did he take out those 5 children, like he did in the games and the books, but in the film he's been luring night guards to the pizzeria to take them out too. This Afton has most likely been killing longer than any other version of the character. It's turned him into even more of a lunatic, and to quote himself, a head case. So when Mike finally shows up, he's ecstatic but also incredibly nervous. He needs him to take the job. Once he's in the pizzeria, the animatronics will handle him. This could be a way to wipe every part of his slate clean. No witnesses anywhere left. As Mike walks out the door, he thought that his one chance to bury the truth just left forever. So when Mike does call back to take the job, he's the happiest man on the planet. Afton is barely keeping it together as he gives him all the info. Now all he has to do is sit back and let the animatronics take care of him. I really wish Afton got at least one more scene somewhere in the middle of the film. Matthew Lillard does such a good job portraying him, and it feels really odd that until the climax, the last time we see the main villain of the film is before Mike even begins his week. This is definitely more of a pacing problem rather than a writing problem. The twist still works for audiences, but if we just had one more scene with Afton, it would be a much better reveal for audiences that didn't play the game. Because on the final night, Afton finally reappears in a suit that fans will be much more familiar with. Walking out from the entrance with his white glowing eyes showing in the dark is the perfect way to reveal Afton as an imposing threat. The look of the withered spring Bonnie suit is perfection. You can instantly tell that this is what will eventually become Springtrap. I also love how he just comes out of absolutely nowhere. All of a sudden, Mike looks down the entrance of the pizzeria and watches this monstrous creature with pinprick eyes come out from the darkness. It's terrifying and awesome. Afton's characterization in the final scene is basically what everyone wanted to see.
Could just leave it alone, could you? Lucky me! This is perfect. First I killed your brother, now I killed you. Symmetry, my friend. Little ones tell me you have a sister. You, however, are finished. We're all for temper tantrums, aren't we, Vanessa?
He's unhinged and sadistic, but unlike the novel, this one has charm. He has showmanship with his knife wipe and inflated tone. He sounds terrifying with a robotic filter on his voice to pair with his excitement over the situation on full display. It's a type of mad glee that's almost contagious. Even though you hate him, you're also smiling watching this scene because he's having a good time. Something else that adds to his imposing presence is his height. Because he's played by Matthew Lillard, who is 6'3" by the way, he's an imposing giant. Look at this screenshot. Look at the height difference between him and Mike. Imagine seeing a monster with glowing, piercing white eyes running at you with this size difference. In this last scene, we also see all 3 of Book Afton's major character traits pop back up in movie Afton. First is his cruelness. This one is pretty obvious, as he repeatedly attacks and degrades Mike while taunting him with how he killed his brother, just reveling in his evil nature, but without the big goofy grin on his face that he has in the graphic novel. This is such a major character trait that even earlier in the film they define him as, quote, a cruel, evil man. He also has the same motivation as Book Afton, but written in a way that makes more sense. He killed a bunch of kids in the past and is now trying to silence anyone who gets close to the truth like before. But because of the connection he has to Mike in this film, it makes more sense to why he would be so willing to invite him into the pizzeria as a night guard despite the risk of being exposed. Afton doesn't like loose ends. He wants to take out every and any witness he can. He needs symmetry. Of course, we can't talk about Afton without talking about the major change that this movie made to the lore. Unlike the games, in the movie, Afton only has one other family member, his daughter Vanessa. Truthfully, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I don't mind that they changed the story. It makes the movie even more of a fresh take on FNAF, but there is literally only one scene between Vanessa and William to showcase their relationship, and it's at the end of the film. Vanessa implies how cruel her father is at different points in the film while she's spending time with Mike, but we never actually hear about any of her experiences, just what he did to others around her. This is definitely where that extra Afton scene would have been nice. If we got some type of scene where Afton stopped by Mike's house, it could have cemented more of their relationship. Maybe he runs into Vanessa and she acts visibly frightened and uncomfortable. Because in the climax, their scene plays out like she's standing up to him, but because we never saw any scenes with them together, the impact is lost a bit. However, there is a moment of subtle acting that I want to draw attention to. When Afton stabs Vanessa, you can see on his face for a split second a moment of sadness after she says, "Dad." Similar to Game Afton, I think he does love his family. He does genuinely care about Vanessa. For all the horrible things he has done and all the ways he might have messed her up, he might still care about her. All of the horrible things he did in the games were presumably for his family, for his son. This Afton might have a similar motive. Maybe in the next film we'll find out he did all the evil he did in this universe for Vanessa or another family member for some reason. But he still screwed up Vanessa's childhood. He still committed heinous acts. So in that way, he also keeps the second major character trait of Afton in the book, his vileness. He's still, despite any potential love he has towards Vanessa, a wicked man. He commits these sins despite knowing it's wrong, and regardless of his reasoning, that still makes him morally evil. Now, look, I adore the Springlock failure scene. After years of getting teased on how it went down in the games and the books, actually seeing it in live action is awesome. But I do have one small critique. The cupcake should not have been the one to set it off. In fact, none of the animatronics should have set it off. It should have been set off by the one wearing it. The reason why the Springlock failure scene in FNAF 3 was such a great and memorable moment is because it's Afton's fault. He led himself to his own demise. He tried to use the same suit that he used to enact so much evil in to save himself. And once he thought it was safe, it was his laughter that set off the Springlocks. In the movie, the Springlocks were set off because of the animatronics directly interfering with it, so a lot of that cathartic impact is lost. I do think the scene is helped by him insulting them before they try anything, almost like he's sealing his own fate. But it still feels less impactful than the original game version. And I get that this suit is much more durable, acting like a suit of armor instead of a rusty fossil, so something like a laugh wouldn't be likely to set off the suit like it would in the games. But they could have done something different. Maybe he could have tried taking a few swigs at the animatronics and that's what set off the Springlocks? I'm not sure, but there were other ways to do this. While I do have problems with this scene, it does showcase the last of Book Afton's traits, his cowardice. Now that his back is against the wall with nowhere to run, he instead insults the victims who finally have power over him. He even straight up says,
"Look how small you are, how worthless you are. I made you."
Look at how small you are, which is ironic since he probably felt big taking the lives of small children who couldn't fight back. But now, he's the one who feels small. He's the one in danger. And all he could do is repeatedly try and fail to make them feel small. Putting all that together, the scene is still pretty incredible at characterizing Afton with such little screen time, so I'll give it a pass. To wrap things up, he gets to say his famous line,
"I always come back."
Is dragged away, and the last we see is him still suffering in the back room. Currently, this is the last time we see Afton in the movie timeline. The next film is currently being made and set to release next year in December 2025, so we'll see what happens to him next fairly soon. But I am pretty satisfied with how he was portrayed in this film. Keep in mind, I don't think it's perfect. Afton should have had at least one more scene to remind the audience that he's still around. I think it would have made the reveal that much more impactful. It also would have allowed for more potential character moments because, again, him and Vanessa only share one scene together. But really, that just shows how well this Afton clicked as a villain. I just wanted to see more of him and more when he was fully revealed and allowed to be malicious. Matthew Lillard was most likely told just how important this character is to the games and the fans, so he really didn't want to disappoint in his performance. I'm happy to say that he absolutely killed it. It is a very different portrayal of Afton, of course, but he still feels in line with what we've seen before. In a way, he kind of reinvented the character for more audiences to enjoy. Overall, I am satisfied with Afton's adaptation to screen, and I'm excited to see what the sequel has planned for him. That's about all I have to say on the movie's version of Afton. Now we can finally go back and talk about the last two games that he appears in, and lucky for us, they are both in chronological and release order, so that makes explaining them much easier. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator takes place sometime after the fire at the end of FNAF 3. In terms of gameplay, this is unlike anything else in the series, being a mix of a tycoon simulator and the sit and survival gameplay we're all used to. While half of the gameplay is devoted to creepy animatronic antics filled with suspense and jump scares, the other half lets us decorate our own pizzeria with animatronics, arcade games, and of course, sell out advertisements. But this entry has a much more important purpose. This is the finale of the original story. Pizza Sim's animatronics all consist of past characters that have yet to be given proper conclusions. These include Elizabeth inside of Circus Baby, the rest of the fun times that have been morphed into Molten Freddy, which also contain the last of Afton's experimental remnant, Charlie, aka the puppet that's now been trapped by Lefty, and of course, William Afton in his springlock suit. Now, look, I don't really enjoy this design, like, at all. Basically everything about Springtrap that worked has been replaced with something worse. His head is comically bigger, his muzzle is thicker with stupid buck teeth, and on top of that, there's just a lot of major design inconsistencies between Springtrap and the aptly fan-named Scraptrap. Now, supposedly, Afton has been attempting to fix himself after the ending of FNAF 3, but that doesn't explain how he somehow has more leftover flesh than before? Whatever. Inconsistencies aside, this game gave us possibly the most important thing for Afton's character in the entire saga, a whole slew of voice lines. PJ Haywood, who played Afton in the opening cutscene of Sister Location, returns to give us way more lines than just one cutscene supplied. Sister Location was technically the first mainline game to feature proper voice acting, not counting FNAF World of course, and that is continued here in this game. We're not going to go over every single voice line, since some of them are very short and sweet, only making sense when you die from Afton, but there are a few I want to go over. The first is at the end of his salvage minigame. At the end of every workday, you the player are able to conduct a brief minigame where you salvage some old animatronics. In-game, these can help boost your profits for the overall day. But more importantly, you get a special voice line for every animatronic you encounter. Let's play Afton's voice line at the end of this minigame. Keep in mind the last time we heard his voice and note the major differences.
What a deceptive calling. I knew it was a lie the moment I heard it, obviously. But it is intriguing nonetheless.
The thing that strikes me almost immediately when I hear Afton's voice is how monstrous it sounds. Compared to his very smooth and suave way of talking back in Sister Location, he now actually sounds like the monster he truly is. His voice has become sultry and raspy. It's almost like a growl at times. It now has a slight reverb if you listen closely due to the spring locks that are most likely lining what's left of his throat. And it actually sounds like he's in pain while he's speaking. But let's analyze what he's actually saying. To repeat, what a deceptive calling. I knew it was a lie the moment I heard it, obviously, but it is intriguing nonetheless. This is interesting because as we know, the entirety of Pizza Sim is meant to be a trap. It's specifically made to lure all of the remaining characters still out there and bring them to one location. Afton apparently knows this, but he still takes the bait. He still walks right in even though he knows that it's a trap. There are two potential reasons why he did this. The first, which is aided by other voice lines, is that Afton wanted to see the effects that his remnant experiments had on the remaining souls. Why he wanted to do this? Well, that's kind of where the theory loses momentum. Other than just to know, there is no good reason why Afton would still care about Remnant after all this time. After everything it did to him personally, I feel like he figured out after 30 years that Remnant isn't going to save him or his son. The more likely theory, to me anyway, is that Afton really did fall for the trap, but didn't realize it until it was too late. Afton in this voice line is trying to cover up his mistake. He's essentially saying, yeah, I totally knew this was a trap, bro. I just wanted to come here because I thought it was cool. Keep in mind, while Afton does have above average intellect, and he's demonstrated it before, when it comes to in-the-moment decisions, he's actually kind of stupid. He killed Charlie because he was angry and irrationally blamed someone else, completely forgetting any moral ethics. He ran headfirst into the Springlock suit and laughed maliciously even though he probably knew how prone to failures the Springlocks were. And here he saw another Freddy's Pizzeria and ran headfirst into it without stopping for a second to think. He could have avoided any of these bad outcomes if he just thought it through. When he plans things ahead like he does in the gameplay of FNAF 3, Afton can be genuinely scary. That's his strength. But it's been heavily demonstrated that in terms of in-the-moment decisions, Afton acts very dumb. It's one of his biggest vices. Now that we have our introduction to the new Afton, I want to go over some of his voice lines that play during gameplay. Most of them are just simple catchphrases, but there is a couple I want to note. The first is him getting to say his catchphrase for the first time.
I always come back.
Hard to believe it took 6 games to get to the line most people relate to Afton. Not much to say here other than history has been made.
Fascinating. What they have become.
This line speaks for itself. Afton is simply interested in what the other souls have become after being bound to their animatronics for so long. And honestly, I can't blame him. Elizabeth has become a demented roller skater, Charlie has been ensnared by a bear, and the rest of them have just become this pool of animatronic sludge. It has been decades since he's last seen any other animatronics, so he's probably genuinely surprised that everyone else looks just as worse for wear as he does.
How can I resist a promise such as this?
So, while we know how Afton fell into the trap, the question now comes down to why? What was the bait? Like, sure, there was another Freddy's Pizzeria, and that will draw animatronics, but why did Afton specifically want to come here? Well, I believe it's because the answer is the most obvious one. He just wants to kill again. The promise is to have another victim, another prey for him to hunt. Afton, after all this time, has become nothing more than a monster who's aching to kill. He spent the entirety of FNAF 3 wandering around a horror attraction just to find another victim. And now all he cares about is getting the thrill back. I know this isn't the most fun or intriguing answer, but what more can you really do for him? He failed his original goal long ago, and he's still paying for his sins, but not learning from them. He doesn't have any grand aspirations anymore. He just wants to feel the rush of a kill. The last line we'll look at, however, is the one I find most interesting.
You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me.
Okay, so this needs a bit of explaining. I figured I had to bring this up eventually, and now is pretty much the perfect time. There is a heavy amount of evidence that in every single FNAF game besides FNAF 2 and the game that comes after Pizza Sim, you are playing as the same character. That character being Mike Schmidt from the first game. Except his name isn't actually Schmidt. This is a William Afton video, so I won't go through his whole story, which is a roller coaster, but essentially, in all these games, you've been playing as the final member of the Afton family, Michael Afton, William's eldest son and the one that technically started all of this years ago in a Foxy mask. Out of everyone we know about, he was the only one of his family to not eventually have his soul bound to an animatronic, and throughout all of these games, Mike has been attempting to end the suffering of his family, to find them and hopefully set them free. Back in FNAF 3, it wasn't just the player versus Springtrap, it was father versus son. So when Afton says the line, "You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me," He's talking to his son. I always found this dynamic of the father versus the son to be so interesting, but that's a topic to go into on a Michael Afton video. So if you like this one, make sure to like and subscribe so I have an indication that people like this and they want to see another video. This leads me perfectly into talking about the ending of the game, because there is one crucial part of this whole puzzle that has yet to click. Who set the trap? Who set up the pizzeria? Who lured them all here? Well, it's simple. It's Henry Emily. Remember that guy all the way back from the Silver Eyes? William's old business partner? The one who lost his daughter because of William's rage? Again, this is an Afton video, so I won't focus all too much on Henry, but long story short, after years of sitting around doing nothing after his daughter's death, Henry eventually decided to actually try and stop the cycle of evil and make this fake pizzeria as a trap to lure back every remaining animatronic that still had a soul bound to it. Mike wasn't meant to be lured like the others, that was all luck. At the end of the game, Henry lights the entire pizzeria ablaze, burning all of the remaining animatronics together so that they can't ever come back again, which will hopefully let them pass in peace. I want to highlight a piece of his end speech.
For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, friend.
There was nothing to analyze, I just find it very satisfying that Afton not only got karma again, but this time it's being delivered by his old friend who's getting retribution for his daughter. With that, the last remaining remnants of the original Fazbear story burn to the ground, along with its monster. The innocent souls are allowed to finally pass in peace, while Afton is destroyed for good. But this wasn't as satisfying as it should be, right? Afton wasn't even the main antagonist of this game like he was in FNAF 3. For an ending to the main villain, it certainly feels a bit lackluster. This is definitely the biggest weakness of Pizza Sim in my opinion. Because they're bringing in all of the loose ends and because they're all such integral characters, it feels like none of them get to shine besides Henry. There should have been more focus put on Afton's motives and reasoning in relation to everyone else, but instead, he's just another antagonist for the player to fight. But where are we going to find a satisfying ending now that he's apparently gone for good? Well, we have one final game to look over. Ultimate Custom Night was released as the final Click Team original FNAF game before they moved into the 3D Steel Wool era with its new story. It's a final send-off to fans of the original era with the biggest challenge you'll ever face, over 50 animatronics that you have to battle in a massive challenge. The game allows you to set your own AI difficulty to each individual character, meaning you can customize the night to however you like. Springtrap and the more broken down Afton are both available as enemies you can face, but unfortunately, neither of them receive any new voice lines, so nothing really to analyze. Back when this game released, a lot of people thought that it was non-canon. I mean, there's no logical way all of these animatronics can be in one place at the same time. Or is there? Because there is one final character I want to talk about before I wrap up Afton's timeline. Cassidy, the spirit that's bound to Golden Freddy. Maybe. Just inserting this in here since this script was written months before the video went out and had constant rewrites, but now some people are saying that the Golden Freddy kid is someone called Andrew? I think it's Cassidy personally, and for this video that's what I'll refer to as the spirit. Cool? Cool. In the past, I've mentioned that there were 5 original victims. There were 4 children that had their souls bound to the main animatronics, and a 5th I didn't really focus on. Well, this is getting heavily into theory territory, but it is important to try and explain what the heck is going on in Ultimate Custom Night. I do believe that Henry's plan worked. He did burn down and destroy the last of the FNAF tragedies in that fire. Except for one. The one that can't be burned down. The one that is much more ethereal and ghostly than the others. The one that's been a secret since the very first game. The one that was always a vengeful spirit, and the one Afton should not have killed. The game basically outright tells us through rare voice lines after your deaths that you're playing as William Afton, caught between life and death and being held in an infinite limbo. Cassidy, who's bound to Golden Freddy, is holding him in his own purgatory, where he's forced to relive his sins for eternity. That's how, in a canon sense, every night and setting you play in this game is canon. It's just another of Afton's endless attempts to try and survive a night before being thrust back into it again. The villain is now going through what the player and main hero has been going through for 6 straight games. It seems like Afton will just be stuck in this loop forever, unable to escape. That is until you find a secret cutscene involving an old friend that we haven't seen in years. Old Man Consequences. This guy was an extremely minor character in FNAF World, which on its own is a questionably canon game. So why is he, of all characters, chosen as one of the 50 antagonists for the final send-off to the story? Well, when you activate his Easter egg, you're taken back to his same pond that he was fishing at in FNAF World, but his dialogue is completely different. It reads, Now, in truth, we to this day are still trying to decipher what this means, but I have a pretty good idea thanks to my years of trying to unscramble this story. I believe that Old Man Consequences is meant to be Henry. The bear sprite is meant to be Cassidy. Henry is telling Cassidy to let Afton go, to move on and let him literally go to hell. Leave the demon to his demons. Let Afton pay for his sins and move on. Truth is, Cassidy doesn't know how to move on. Think about it, she was the only one who didn't get peace. She's still out there somewhere. There was no fire to free her. Everyone else got to move on, but she just can't. Either she is still physically bound to the suit, or she doesn't have the will to move on. There's one more important thing to note in this cutscene, and that's the ambiance. It's a very creepy ambiance that's indistinguishable to the naked ear, but if you speed it up, you can hear someone screaming. When you first hear it, the words might be unintelligible, but luckily for you, I've been playing with the audio for a long time, and here's my best interpretation of what's being said. Headphone warning because this might be loud. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Afton's final voice line in the series, and it's a pathetic last-ditch effort to save himself. This is what we were looking for. This is the satisfying ending we wanted. Afton, after all that he's done, is finally paying for what he did. Yeah, it's locked behind an Easter egg that was pretty hard to discover, but it's still here, and I'm glad it is. Henry and Cassidy are having a calm little conversation while the maker of their pain is burning in agony behind them. I'm sorry, but this has to be one of the most satisfying moments in the series, in my opinion, of course. If Pizzeria Simulator was the ending of the story, Ultimate Custom Night is the epilogue. The whole point of this game is to add further context about what exactly was happening in the main story. The Five Nights at Freddy's games aren't exactly well known for being easy to understand, even to hardcore fans, so having a whole bonus, completely free game where you can get a bunch of extra context for the story you love is really generous. Of course, we have one last thing to talk about, the ending, and I admit, it's pretty confusing. If you beat the hardest mode in the game, the final cutscene, the last screen we ever see of the original story, is of Cassidy inside of Golden Freddy, twitching, as the camera is slowly being pulled away. That's it. That's the entire scene. Now, this can signify many things, and people have made countless theories on what this final scene means. Some say this is meant to represent that Afton will continue to be tortured even though he beat the hardest challenge. Some say that Afton is moving on into his true eternal punishment, leaving Cassidy no clear idea of what to do next. And some say that it might be as simple as Cassidy choosing to move on. But after talking to a bunch of my friends who are also massive FNAF fans, I think I have a theory on what this could mean. I believe that Cassidy is being forced to leave Afton behind. She's being dragged away from Afton and is being forced to let him go. But now, she's alone, unable to move on, unable to make the man that hurt her suffer. She's perpetually stuck, and she doesn't know what to do. This would also line up with the theory that Cassidy is one of the only characters from the original story to be present in the newer games through Princess Quest, so I really like this theory. And with that, the entire story of William Afton, with some notes from his interpretations in the books and movie, have been covered. Holy crap, I'm so tired. But we aren't done just yet. It's time to put everything together we know about him to fully look through his characterization. So who really was William Afton? Well, I think it's safe to say that he was a truly terrible father. We don't have any indication of a maternal presence anywhere in the story. There is no case of a Mrs. Afton anywhere. So we'll assume that William went through a divorce and kept custody of his 3 children. With Afton always busy maintaining his business, he didn't have time to raise his 3 kids, so he snuck a walkie-talkie into his youngest son's plush bear. He also installed cameras in his house so he could watch his family whenever he needed to. Obviously, this is not a plausible solution to this problem. I know it comes down to how much money they were making, but Afton should have hired a caretaker instead of trying to survey his house through the eyes of his own mascot. Afton is also someone who is hiding genuine rage, as after his son is dead, he proceeds to blame Henry's creation even though it's his own neglect that caused this. Of course, people put irrational blame onto others when grieving. It's just a natural human response. But what Afton's rage let him do is inexcusable. He lashed out at an innocent girl and took her life. That is an absolutely heinous thing to do. It's when Afton stopped being even slightly sympathetic and was cemented into being a true monster. I do believe that despite it all, William did sincerely love his family. He might have been a terrible father, but there is at least a smidge of evidence that he did want to protect them. Like how he was keeping Elizabeth away from Baby, for example. But basically all of the audience's sympathy is gone when he takes out Charlie, all because he was mad due to Henry's creation taking his creation. Now before, I mentioned that Afton wanted to use Remnant to save his son after death. But in reality, I think he only used that as a thin excuse after his initial attempts and failures. Theoretically, all he needed was 1 life to get more Remnant, more than enough to experiment on. Yet he took 5 other confirmed lives just so he could keep experimenting like a mad doctor. He wasn't doing this for some greater good, he was doing it because he's a psychopath. He killed once and he wanted to kill again. And on top of that, he targeted children who couldn't easily fight back against him, which makes him all the more hateable. At first, he tried ways to indirectly get what he needed by using the Funtime animatronics. That way, the blame couldn't be solely placed on him, but that only resulted in his own daughter dying. Through the cutscenes in Ultimate Custom Night, we know that he had to take matters into his own hands. At first, he started with well-constructed plans before he just went completely insane and got more sloppy, leaving more evidence, and he still kept getting away with it. His ego just continued to grow, and he knew that he could commit as many crimes as he wanted. He could take life and bring life to anything. He was playing God. That is until he was completely stopped in his tracks when he's faced with his own actions. Like a coward, he ran into the same suit that he used to cause so much pain and suffering. And that same suit that he considered a safe haven became his ultimate hell. For 30 years, he was left to rot, and then went on the prowl again to hunt and kill anyone around him. And when that failed, he tried again, falling into another trap. He literally can't help himself. He's almost like a lion that hasn't been fed in a week looking for his prey. He just needs to cause more pain to someone. He needs to feel powerful. And that led him to his eventual and final downfall. Afton isn't just cruel, he isn't just sadistic. He's a coward trying to feel more powerful than he actually is. So why is he still scary? He's utterly pathetic so often, and yet we look at him as being the symbol of horror in the franchise, the boogeyman. Is this title undeserved? Well, I don't think so. See, what makes Afton truly scary to me is just how human he is. I brought this up earlier when first listening to his voice, but he really does sound like a normal person, doesn't he? And most likely in his life, he looked like a normal person. But behind the scenes, behind his mask, he was basically a monster. He acts all suave, sophisticated, and outwardly friendly on the surface, but that's a thin veil, a performance. That is why he's scary, because he's not some ethereal boogeyman, he's not an evil spirit or an advanced AI, he's just a man. A man that had one bad thing happen in his life and decided to enact his pain on others. A man who most likely only regretted his actions after the fact. A man who ruined people's lives because of his own selfish reasoning. And to me, that's way more terrifying than any other type of antagonist, because these can exist in real life. Obviously, they can't turn into zombie robot bunnies, but you could be walking down the street and pass someone just like William Afton, and you would have no idea what he's done. What I think many people miss in his characterization is how at every turn, Afton kept making evil decisions of his own free will. Yes, he did go through a terrible loss, nobody is denying that, but his actions and reactions after that loss are what truly shape him. We as humans cannot control everything that happens in our lives, but we can control how we react to them. We can choose to try and do better and make our lives brighter. But Afton didn't do this. He let his anger control him, and that led him down a path filled with evil. He is just a man, but he's a man that chose to do every vile action he did of his own volition, and that is possibly the most frighteningly realistic thing in this entire story. In a franchise filled with possessed animatronics, Statue of Liberty Chica, and flippin' Fazgoo, Five Nights at Freddy's gave us the most realistic depiction of a villain I've ever seen. I know that the newer games have taken a turn into sci-fi rather than the old cold case mystery horror feeling of past games, but I think that just highlights how special Afton was as an antagonist. We probably won't get something like him again. Honestly, looking through his story just reminds me of the early days of the games, that bit of time from 2014 and 2015 where we as a community came together to try and figure out the identity of this little purple sprite. As an antagonist, I think he was perfect for us as a fan base to rally against. His story had highs and lows, and it was definitely a tragic tale, but boy did we have fun with it. And with the second movie in development, it seems like we're only going to continue to see more of him. I'm really excited to see more of what the newer developers like Steelwool, Megacat, and Click Team will cook with their future games. Not to mention the Fazbear fanverse. It doesn't seem like this franchise will stop anytime soon, and I'm glad. I can only hope that the Mimic will be just as good as an antagonist as Afton was. I certainly know Vanny wasn't that great, and Glitchtrap is there, but who knows what they'll be creating. Into the Pit is really awesome after all. But even with all of that, sometimes it's important to look back at where we came from, and the monster that started it all, the man behind the slaughter. Holy crap, that was a lot of talking. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I didn't anticipate just how much content there would be to cover for Afton when I first started this little project, but man, I'm glad that I did. It was really fun doing research and playing through the games again to collect clips for this video. Granted, there are still the many voice lines from Special Delivery, and I could have gone deeper on Afton in the 2 sequel novels, but there wasn't much there to analyze. This took an incredibly long amount of time to make, so if you can, please like and subscribe, it helps out more than you know. Comment below who you think I should do a video on next. The other character analysis videos I've done have all been on Evil Dead, but if you want, I can do another FNAF character. Though I doubt the video will be as long as this one, considering the other characters of FNAF, save for technically Mike, have considerably less screen time. But I do have some thoughts on Cassidy and Henry, so who knows. The next video I plan to work on is of the nefarious villain Dyson from Tron Uprising, so if you're a fan of Tron, you can look forward to that. Either way, I'm gonna go lie down and rest my voice. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see everyone later. Bye bye!